All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome you to this opportunity. We are trying to get ourselves started on the book of Isaiah. I know some of you are reading through Isaiah, but just don't throw in the towel. Let me share something with you that I have to try to understand myself. I want you to listen very carefully, because I think this may help us. Notice I said us. Try to understand there are some difficult parts of Isaiah. What in the world is he talking about? Remember this. The physical nation that came through Abraham's descendants, called Hebrews, Israelites, later called Jews, was not it. That was not the end. The temple in Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, was not it. That was not the objective. All three of those were a means to an end, not the end itself. They believed they were. They believed that they were God's chosen people regardless. Remember in Psalms 137, when they were in Babylonian captivity, what could they not do?
Sing the song of home.
They couldn't even sing. Why? They were not in the, quote, promised land.
Well, they were heartbroken.
Okay, I realize that. But again, who is the Israel today?
We are.
Biblically.
We are Christians.
The church of Christ, the body of Christ. What is the Jerusalem today?
The church.
Come on, class.
The church.
The New Jerusalem. We studied that in Hebrews. We studied it in Revelation.
The church.
That land over there is no different than land anywhere. If the Muslims and the Jews understood that war would stop in a minute. They're both battling under a false pretense. So as we study Isaiah, keep that in mind. What did the Israelites do shortly after they crossed the river, coming out of Egypt? They were happy. They were on their way to the promised land. Everything was hunky-dory. Right? I almost started to say as soon as they dried off, but they didn't get wet, did they? But a figure of speech. Almost as soon as they, quote, dried off, what did they start doing? Complaining. And they never stopped complaining. Never stopped. So keep that in mind as you study, and I keep that in mind as I study Isaiah, trying to work through this. All right, we are still in chapter 1. There's a lot of information in chapter 1 that we have to understand. And I'm just sharing with you, I went back and reread starting in chapter 1. Because until you understand that, you're not going to understand what is following through this, 66 chapters, I believe it is, 66 chapters. I want to help you to help me to help this class. But class, you got to do your own homework. You've got to do your own homework. If you depend upon me, it's going to be the most boring 45 minutes you've ever spent in your life. If you will do your homework, it will be a great help. All right, in chapter 1, we read last week verses 10 through 15. He simply said, what you are doing is not worth a plug nickel. Now, that's my phrase. You guys know where I come from. I'm not highly educated. I got a little common sense, I think. Okay. He is simply showing them all that you are going through is in vain. And then he admonishes them in, all right, someone read very quickly, read verses 16 and 17 of chapter 1 of Isaiah.
Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Put away the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Rebuke the oppressor. Defend the fatherless. Plead for the widow.
Okay, simply get your act together. Get your act right. All right? Then he goes on, and we read this last week, just a quick review, verses 18 through 20. Someone read, please.
Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall be as wool. If you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured by the sword, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
Did any of you, and I don't want you to raise your hand, but did any of you read Deuteronomy 28, 29, and 30? If you didn't, you're missing the picture, what he's talking about right here. Those chapters are filled with if. If you remain faithful, this. If you do not remain faithful, this. This has nothing to do, and I continually go back to this over and over and over again. This has nothing to do with the promise that God made to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. There was no if, and, or buts. I'll make of your seed a great nation. I'll give that nation a land, and from your seed will come a blessing to all the families of the earth. That is the whole purpose of the 39 books of the Old Testament. If was conditional on the individual. These people were never chosen for salvation. They were chosen to bring forth, ultimately, the Messiah. And it happened. It happened. That's why we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It happened. And as I made the comment last week, he was through with them as far as a nation of physical people. He was not through with them relative to salvation, no more than he was not through with the Gentile. Read Romans chapter 11, for example. Over and over, and some of these things that I'm saying to you might be strange to you. Man, where in the world? I hope it's not strange to you, but to the world, this would cause almost, well, it has almost caused a war. All right, now listen, and I have the problem, and you do too. Sometimes, who is speaking? Is Isaiah speaking, or is God speaking through Isaiah? Sometimes I have to, and I realize sometimes in your printed edition, there may be quotation marks that would probably indicate God is speaking. But I have had that problem, and I still have that problem. exactly who is speaking here. Now, is it God or is it Isaiah? Now, I realize Isaiah was an inspired prophet, but I mean, was these the words of God himself, or is this Isaiah observation? And it would appear, and starting in verse 21 of chapter 1, this is Isaiah speaking. All right, will someone read, we'll just break this down. Will someone read Genesis?
The quotation marks are put in by the writer, the transcribers.
Okay, I'm fully aware of that. Right, the quotation marks, I assume all of you know that we're reading in English, in Isaiah, for example, we're reading an English translation from the Hebrew language. Well, probably not the translation from the Hebrew, but from the Greek. And sometimes these things are translator. And again, we've talked about this how many times? Over and over. All right, will someone read Isaiah chapter 1? Let's begin let's just read 21 through 23 as a start.
How the faithful city has become a harlot. She who was full of justice, righteousness once lodged in her, but now murderers. Your silver has become dross, your drink diluted with water. Your rulers are rebels and companions of thieves. Everyone loves a bribe and chases after rewards. They do not defend the orphan, nor does the widow's plea come before them.
Okay, now let's go back to, again, I know I've heard some of you, let's go on. Well, you have to lay this foundation. We're going to get further into Isaiah somewhere, sometime. We cannot ignore what he's talking about here. You might want to say, well, hey, let's get on over to chapters 30 and 40, and well, we will eventually if we live long enough. This is a big book. What is it, 66 chapters? And we have to understand the beginning here. Now, listen to what he said. How the faithful city has become harlot. It was full of justice. Righteousness lodged in it when?
Once.
Under David.
I don't have the answer. Could it have been in the early days of Solomon?
David was faithful to God always.
Well, okay, David could be, okay. That they were, at one time, they were a faithful city. But then, now what's that word but? But now what? As was read there. This evidently is Isaiah speaking here of his observation. All right, now let's read on. Let's see, let's read 24 through 26.
Therefore the Lord God of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, declares, I will be relieved of my adversaries, and avenge myself on my foes. I will also turn my hand against you, and will smelt away your dross as with lye, and will remove all your alloy. Then I will restore your judges as at the first, and your counselors as at the beginning. After that, you will be called the city of righteousness, a faithful city.
When will they become a faithful city, or did they ever become a faithful city? I don't have the answer. I'm not asking the question because I have the answer, because we read last week, for example, Matthew 21, the parable of where that he sent prophets and they destroyed the prophets. They sent more prophets and they destroyed the prophets, and they finally sent the son. And what did they do with the son?
Killed him.
In the parable, they killed him. And then he goes on into chapter 23, the latter part. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. How often, what was it? The phrase, how often I would gather you together as a hen gathers her chicks? But you would not. And then chapter 24 of Matthew is the history of the destruction of Jerusalem. These things we have to keep in mind, class. Now, I realize we have an advantage. They did not know always what the prophet was talking about. Way over their head. We sit here, we have the full picture right here. They didn't have that. We have an advantage because we are looking, as you look at it, we are looking back. They were looking forward with the mindset that is the Jew, we're it. There's nothing better than us. There will be nothing better than us. That tinted their understanding, or maybe more correctly, their misunderstanding. All right, let's move on. I'm waiting for questions and comments. I don't like a lecture. The lecture comes the next hour. This is a class. I want your participation. I want your insight from your study. I shudder when I stand up here. It's not my responsibility. I'm just a director of the study. All right, let's read now 27 through 31. Let's read now 27 through 31.
Zion will be redeemed with justice, and her repentant ones with righteousness. But transgressors and sinners will be crushed together, and those who forsake the Lord will come to an end. Surely you will be ashamed of the oaks which you have desired, and you will be embarrassed at the gardens which you have chosen. For you will be like an oak whose leaf fades away, or as a garden that has no water. The strong man will become tinder, his work also a spark. Thus they shall both burn together, and there will be none to quench them.
Obviously, and again, in your study, and you may disagree, but this seems to be a picture of the captivity that was going to come. You really cannot, I hate to say this because I don't want to confuse you anymore, but you really cannot understand some of this unless you understand Jeremiah and Ezekiel, particularly Jeremiah. Because Jeremiah was just on the verge of their going into, that is Judah, going into captivity. Where at the time of Isaiah, it had not yet happened. It was going to happen. And if you are really interested in wanting to get a handle on this, I would recommend to read Jeremiah. We are supposed to be a people of the Word. We're supposed to be able to give an answer for what we believe. Can we? Do we? Are we able? You say, well, wait a minute. Wait a minute, Parker. Wait a minute. I've got a job to do. I did too. I've got a family to take care of. I did too. Are those excuses? Or are they reasons? I'll put a challenge to us. Let us be what that sign out there says, or take the sign down. It is just that simple. Isaiah is a challenge, yes. Believe me, it is a challenge. So what Isaiah is doing is trying to get them to think straight. One thing that I continue to look at, class, in this study, and I keep bringing up Ezekiel chapter 16. Because to me that is a vital information where Ezekiel shows them Judah and Jerusalem. Remember, that's who Isaiah is talking about. That they became worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. They became worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. And yet they still existed. The only reason why, we go back to Abraham and the promise. That's the only reason why. Deborah?
Well, actually, it's not as complicated as you may think, because the theme throughout all the scriptures, starting from the beginning to the very end, is this theme of, we have to get right with God. We have to leave our sinfulness and we have to put on our righteousness to get back to that relationship with God that they had in the very beginning. So really the theme, if you keep that in mind as you're reading Isaiah, it's pretty much the same thing all the way through. Pretty much.
Well, you're exactly right. Sin is sin. And sin does the same thing in the 21st century as it did in the first century. It hadn't changed.
Right, it separates us from our
Right.
Creator.
It separates, Isaiah chapter 59. All right, Betty, then move on.
To me, it is Christ is coming. And Isaiah is the most prophetic of all about Christ. And all this is just what was happening at the time. To bring Christ in, there's so many that we'll get into about Christ, the prophecies about him. And
Okay.
he was trying to get them to see this, that there was a time when to me, this section could also apply to Christ, when he was coming to restore the kingdom as it should be.
Okay, we're going to see that in chapter 2 in just a minute. Isaiah is referred to as a messianic prophet because he probably, and I don't have it right up here, there's probably more references to the coming of the Messiah in Isaiah and quoted in the New Testament than any other Old Testament prophet.
Right.
He was definitely, and that's why we call him, I don't know that he's called that in the scriptures, the messianic prophet, but he was. And that's why we need to pay careful and close attention. All right, let's turn to chapter 2. Let's turn to chapter 2. All right, let's see. We will begin, break it down. We will begin in verses 1 through 4. Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 4.
The word that Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord in Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore.
Okay. First thing we have to understand, and again, what was the latter days? All right, some of you, all of you that were present, and if you did not get this, I'll give it to you. I gave you this chart. This chart shows the three periods of Bible history, are comparable the three periods of human life. I know some of you cannot see that because it's small, but anyway, I want you to notice there are three circles.
And the one is open.
Two of them are full, complete.
And one of them's open.
The third one is, didn't run out of ink, didn't run out of paper. This is, if I'm pointing the right place, this is the latter days. This is a significant prophecy in Isaiah chapter 2 that probably blew them away. This whole section, these, if you want one of these, see me after class if you did not get one. Okay. On the day of Pentecost, Peter was quoting from the prophet Joel and said, "It shall come to pass in the last days." Except most of us, well, I guess all of us, are living in the last days. Agree?
Yeah.
No, I did not say the last day. I said the last days.
We are.
Are any of you infants?
No.
Are any of you youth? No, we passed through those. We are living in the last days. And the time of the Messiah was the last days. You must make a clear distinction. I did not say the last day. This could very well be the last day. We are living in the last period of Bible history. We must keep that in mind. And this prophecy is that it will come to pass in the last days. And the best commentary on the Bible is, read Acts chapter 2. This shall come to pass in the last days. What in the world is Isaiah talking about in these 4 verses? Simply, what's he talking about?
Coming of the kingdom.
The church, the gospel, the age of grace and mercy, the age of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Listen to what he's talking about. Again, class, we have to, and it shall come to pass in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be exalted to the top of the mount. What is the Lord's house? We just finished a study in Hebrews. And what was clearly distinguished as the New Jerusalem, the Lord's house. Well, I just told you what the New Jerusalem was. It's the Lord's house. Is it physical? Is it geographically located in a certain city, certain place, a certain country? No. Did they understand that at that time? Probably not. We ought to understand it clearly sitting here in our time. Now listen to what he says. He will teach us his ways, we'll walk in his paths, for out of Zion, what is Zion? What is known as Zion? Jerusalem. Jerusalem. The word of the Lord from Jerusalem, he will judge between the nations. Listen to this. For out of Zion shall go forth his law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, not Mount Sinai. Why is that significant? Why did he say the word of the Lord will go forth from Zion and go forth from Jerusalem? Go back to Hebrews. Go back to our study of Hebrews. The removing completely, lock, stock, and barrel, the whole old system, including the Ten Commandments. We studied that for months. It will go forth out of Jerusalem, not Mount Sinai, not through Moses, but through the spiritual Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem. Now, they shall break their swords. Who is they? Who is they in verses 4? In verse 4, who is they? These are things that I have to deal with as I study. Who is it that's going to break their swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks? Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and neither shall they learn war anymore. Where? In the new Jerusalem. In the heavenly body, the church. Where was the gospel ever advanced? Through the sword, through the spear. The law was. Read the history. He is talking about those that are in the spiritual body, the New Jerusalem, the heavenly city that we talked about in Revelation, that we talked about in our study of Hebrews. See, the Jews today believe this will take place over yonder at some point in time. Bible never taught that. When it's taken in the context. Thoughts or comments? I see, as I glance, I almost see a picture of, whoa, where did this come from? Right here. Yes, Judy.
I have an odd thing. We worked at Potter Children's Home, not Potter, but Schultz Lewis Children's Home in Indiana. And I was not working full-time as a house parent, but I was on relief for the weekend. And they said that I would get a new boy during that time. And when the man showed up with his son, he was strictly a Jewish man, had the rim of the flat rim. I mean, he was totally a Jewish man coming to a Christian children's home with his son. I mean, I was so shocked, I really almost didn't know how to approach him, you know. But it was like, you're giving your child to a Christian home that teaches Christian principles. And he was obviously an extreme Jewish man. That was one of my oddest things that I encountered. That, and I wish that I was a full-time parent to him, because I took him to church the next day and I said, look, we study the Old Testament, you know, because he had to stay with me for that, the first time at church. But it was a very odd feeling, taking somebody out of the Christian, out of the Jewish thinking into the Christian thinking. And I wish that I could have worked with him all the time to see and to show him what we really knew, you know. But that was a very odd feeling and situation for us.
Right. Well, this is what Isaiah is trying to do, or the Lord is trying to do through Isaiah, is to help these people understand the big picture. And that's what the world really has never comprehended. We become, even our government, not to get into politics, even our government becomes so centered on, you do not touch Israel. Whatever Israel wants, Israel gets. False premise. And that dictates a lot of what happens. This is what Isaiah is trying to get them to understand in their early ages. Did he succeed? Well, we'll have to wait and see as we go through the study. All right.
It's not only the Jews that think they are going to go back there. It's a big portion of the denominational world that lives in the millennium. They're going to take down that dome, and they're going to build the temple, and Christ is going to cut up and set up his kingdom for 1,000 years. So it's our government is more concerned about those who teach the millennium than the Jews themselves.
Okay, and I don't know whether you heard what Betty said, but vast majority of denominations believe, again, that the Jews are literally God's chosen people, and they will go back to Jerusalem. They will go back, rebuild the temple. Jesus will come and sit on that throne. Where is it taught in the Scriptures? It's not. All right? The last days, we've already established that. Peter, on the day of Pentecost, very clearly says that which was spoken by the prophet Joel that will come to pass in the last days is here before your very eyes now. Read Acts chapter 2. Read Acts chapter 2. There it is. And of course, what is interesting, that Micah, one of the minor prophets, spoke the very same thing that Isaiah spoke right here. Micah was more or less, in my mind, the country preacher. Isaiah was the big city preacher. Same message. It is identical of what one said, the other said to the audience, whether it was in the village or whether it was in the big city. All right, let me see. Galatians 4 and verse 4, I keep bringing it up. When the fullness of time came, depends on the translation, when the fullness of time came, or in the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. Fullness of whose time? That's what we're seeing. We are seeing the unfolding of the fullness of that time. And we've got a lot of history to cover. All right, let's move on. All right, now, in verses 5 through 11, the prophet is now talking about the present. In Isaiah chapter 2, 1 through 4, he was talking about the future, what would come to pass in the last days. Now he comes back to the reality of what was taking place. All right, if someone will read Isaiah 2, 5 through 11.
Come, house of Jacob, and let us walk in the light of the Lord. For you have abandoned your people, the house of Jacob, because they are filled with influences from the east, and they are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they strike bargains with the children of foreigners. Their land has also been filled with silver and gold, and there is no end to their treasures. Their land has also been filled with horses, and there is no end to their chariots. Their land has also been filled with idols. They worship the work of their hands, that which their fingers have made. So the common man has been humbled, and the man of importance has been abased. But do not forgive them. Enter the rock and hide in the dust, from the terror of the Lord and from the splendor of his majesty. The proud look of man will be abased, and the loftiness of man will be humbled, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day.
In what day? What day is he talking about? He's obviously talking about the judgment that is going to come upon Israel in that day. Now, you go back and you read all of this, and some of you may have read it and wonder, what's he talking about? Well, all of these things is what they put their trust in. Their gold, their silver, their horses. They made covenants with all of these people. God warned them over and over and over again. It's not going to work. And then he says that when all the dust is settled, if you please, God is going to be exalted in that day. What day? Well, if we read on in verses 12 through 12 through 22, we find out what that day is. All right, let's get that before us before class is up. All right, a lengthy reading. Now, we're going to go back and we're going to have to pick up on this because there's a very important point here, but let's get this whole section. Someone read 12 through 22, talking about the day of the Lord. Someone, please.
For the Lord of hosts will have a day of reckoning against everyone who is proud and lofty, and against everyone who is lifted up, that he may be abased. And it will be again all the cedars of Lebanon that are lofty and lifted up, again all the oaks of Bashan, against all the lofty mountains, against all the hills that are lifted up, against every high tower, against every fortified wall, against all the ships of Tarshish, and against all the beautiful craft. The pride of man will be humbled, and the loftiness of men will be abased, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. But the idols will completely vanish. Men will go into caves of the rocks and into holes of the ground, before the terror of the Lord and the splendor of his majesty, when he arises to make the earth tremble. In that day men will cast away to the moles and the bats, their idols of silver and their idols of gold, which they made for themselves to worship, in order to go into the caverns of the rocks and the clefts of the cliffs, before the terror of the Lord and the splendor of his majesty, when he arises to make the earth tremble. Stop regarding man whose breath of life is in his nostrils, for why should he be esteemed?
What is interesting is that, again, Ezekiel and Jeremiah deal with some of this same thing. If I understand this correctly, and if I don't, please correct me, he is simply describing what's going to happen during that time of destruction, of particularly the Babylonian captivity that is, again, more fully described in Ezekiel and in Jeremiah. They cannot escape what is going to happen. The day of the Lord, this again is an interesting point because, again, Joel and Amos both deal with this. Apparently, in the mind of the Jew, the day of the Lord was when they were going to be exalted above everything else, and everything was going to be just perfect. But Amos and Joel shows them the reality of what was going to take place, as Isaiah does right here. All of this is a description of what was going to take place. And it's further described in, all right, let's just very quickly, we got a couple minutes. Let me just bring because we're just about out of time. In chapter 3, okay, let me share something with you. For behold, the day of the Lord, the day of hosts, take away from Jerusalem and from Judah, chapter 3 now, the stock and the store, the whole supply of bread and the whole supply of water, the mighty men and the man of war, the judge and the prophets, and the diviner and the elder, the captain of the 50, and the honorable men, the counselors and the skillful artisans, and the expert in Chandler. What is interesting, and again, if you're interested in this, you're going to have to read those, and I don't know what you have in your Bible, what kind of cross-references, but you've got to read 2 Kings chapters 24 and 25, because this is exactly what happened when Nebuchadnezzar and his army came and destroyed Jerusalem. This is exactly what happened. There was no bread. Now you go ahead and read this section. It is likewise exactly what happened years later. We'll pick up on this in our study.